Okay, we are live, and only Urza is here. Hi, Urza. It is really, really late or really, really early for you. You need to go to bed, sir. Um, but we are discussing The Child Thief by Brom. This is the shelf space. Oh God, what is the month? It's November. It was the October pick. There you go. Time, months. That's how they work. So we're a little late in discussing it, but that's okay. This was my first time reading any sort of Brom work. I know Joanna, you've read it before, and Leanna, you've read many Peter Pan retellings. But anyways, before we get into that, I will let
But no
everybody.
Brom.
Yeah, I will let everybody introduce themselves. I'm Evie. If you don't know me, hi. There you go. Go ahead, Joanna.
Okay, hi, I'm Joanna, and I have a channel called Joanna. So lovely to be here. I did, like Evie mentioned, I actually listened to the audiobook of this last year, and I reread it this year via audio and ebook through Scribd. Yeah.
I'm Leanna from Leanna's Library. The moment you hit go live, like all the sirens and all of the traffic started happening, and it stopped just in time for me to introduce myself. So thank goodness, mostly. Yeah, I don't know. My channel is Leanna's Library, so we covered that. I had never read anything by Brom before, so including The Child Thief, this was my first time. But as Evie said, I'm a huge fan of Peter Pan. And so then I keep reading Peter Pan retellings, and 9 times out of 10, I hate them. But actually, like I've never purchased this, but 3 different people have gifted me this because I was like, it's Peter Pan, so you should read it. So I finally read it now. And yeah, we're going to talk about it.
Should we introduce pets? George is here. Max is downstairs. So, and Kaz is busy terrorizing stuff.
She was threatened with the sprayer when she attacked the cords, so she is regrouping.
And your dog will show up, I'm sure, Joanna, right?
Yeah, she's kind of lounging out with my husband right now, and so is the cat. So,
Um, I know a lot of people were probably looking forward to a rant review from Leanna. Alas, spoiler alert, she liked it, but you might get a rant review from me. So,
yeah.
but yeah, before we get into those shenanigans, I guess.
I love how aware the entire chat is of what Kaz is like.
Yeah. So overall, like, how did you like the reading experience or listening experience of The Child Thief?
I want to hear Leanne's thoughts first. I've been just dying to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, so like I said, I love Peter Pan, and most of the time reading a Peter Pan retelling, like I will always try it because I can't not, but I'm always like, I don't know why I'm doing this to myself because it's never good. It's never good. There are like a couple of Peter Pan retellings that I do actually like, but most of the time I feel like the people writing them, like, not to be like, I don't know, gatekeepy about it, but I'm like, you just don't get it. Like, you don't get Peter Pan. And like, sometimes it feels like maybe they saw the Disney one once when they were kids and now they're adults and they're like, what if Peter Pan was the villain? I have some thoughts. I have some ideas. And they just like write something that is just like, I mean, I guess this is Peter Pan related, but like not really. And the idea of making Peter Pan the villain, it's like you're not really like doing something because like he's not the villain in J.M. Barrie's original. So anyway, like I'm usually like very annoyed, and I always like get angry that these people don't seem to have even read J.M. Barrie's original. So I was pleasantly surprised picking this up that I did really feel like Brom was engaging with J.M. Barrie's Peter Pan. That like obviously he took it in a bunch of different directions, and it's in a lot of ways extremely different from the original, but in a way that still feels like it took its inspiration from the original and then ran with it. It wasn't like some random thing that's so loosely connected to Peter Pan that you're like, how dare you put the name of Peter Pan on this? So
Yeah, I mean, I get what he was going for. I didn't enjoy it really at all. So
do you like Peter Pan though?
So I only read Peter Pan for the first time like literally the month prior to So I was like, all right, I guess I gotta read Peter Pan before I read Child Thief, because I'm not gonna know what the hell's going on. So I read Peter Pan and I was like, okay, like I knew it was supposed to be like dark, especially for, you know, children's book at that time. And I actually, it wasn't as dark as I thought it was going to be. But I enjoyed it. I think I gave it like 4 stars. I know that there are
I'll allow
other,
it.
yeah, there are like other books, like in the series or whatever. There's like Peter and Wendy, and so I don't know if the edition that I read was like all of them together, or if it was just like a subset of, you know, whatever he's published in that world. But I enjoyed it, and I really liked, more than anything, I liked the exploration of motherhood throughout, you know, all the characters from Peter Pan, and, you know, his lack of relationship, or like um his want of a mother figure, and then Wendy and John and Michael, you know, their relationship with their mother, and then the mother figure, Mrs. Darling herself, like her depiction, as a mother and as a woman. I thought that was really, really nice.
Wendy is brought to Neverland to be their mother.
Yeah, exactly. So when I started reading The Child Thief, honestly, I'm the type of person where if I can't connect with the writing style, it's going to be a really, really hard time. And I really couldn't connect with Brom's writing style. It just, I don't know how to describe it. It was, I, again, I know what he was going for. He was very much intentional with his like very almost crass depiction of everything. But I just didn't connect with it. I didn't enjoy it at all. It felt almost gratuitous for me. I wound up listening to it on audio. I switched to purely audio experience, and I could get through it. And I'm like, okay, I see what he's doing, but I still didn't really enjoy it because I wasn't connecting with the writing, wasn't connecting with the characters in any way. But yeah, it was a bad time. So
I'm sorry, Evie. I feel so bad that you didn't like it.
It's a quite long book to not like, too.
Yeah.
It's not
well,
short.
on the bright side, I'm really enjoying this, Joanna.
Oh,
So
really? Well, I'm happy to hear that. So, I'm trying to think of what to say about this particular book. I guess I'll just go ahead and share that the first time I listened to this book, I remember having a struggle through the first quarter of the book, just getting adjusted to it. I think one of the reasons this particular story might be unique and maybe might be a bit might be a miss for some people is that he's blending a few different things together. So he's blending a Peter Pan retelling with an urban fantasy and a King Arthur retelling. And for me, I think that was part of why I even struggled kind of getting into the story or flowing with the story for a while. There's something about it that feels almost incohesive or something as you're starting the story. But for me, it worked. I feel like he was able to kind of blend it together. And I think it worked because, especially with King Arthur, so much of the idea with King Arthur is paganism and Christianity and magic going away from the world. And I just came off reading the Warlord Chronicles by Bernard Cornwell. So I felt like I saw a lot of what he was doing with the Arthurian stuff and how he was tying that in.
yeah.
There are sirens. Again, I just didn't want to unmute myself.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. You know, they're actually coming for me this time instead of Leanna for her bad tea. I mean, to play devil's advocate for myself, like I wonder if I had reread this, like I read it on my own terms, I guess, if I wasn't like trying to force myself to read it for, you know, shelf space or whatever, if I would have enjoyed
Yeah,
it.
blame shelf space.
Yeah. I mean, you say that jokingly, but this is the second time I've hosted, and it's the second book that I've absolutely hated. So, you know,
But what was the first one?
Memory Called Empire. So it's probably a me problem. It's definitely a me problem. But I feel like, so even though I didn't get along with Brom's writing style when I read it, at the same time, if I had relished it a little bit more, I feel like his storytelling is like taking it in bite-sized chunks, because the narrative, it does switch between like Nick and Peter and different perspectives. So I feel if I had taken it a bit slower instead of like trying to rush through it, not really rush through it, but get through it quicker than I normally would, I might have had a better experience with it.
I recently read and then rated more highly probably than it deserves, a book that, because I had read so many that did a similar thing that did it badly, then I was impressed with it because it, I guess, my realization that apparently it's a high bar to do this decently. You know what I mean? So like about this other book that I read. So I was like, it's not that this book is amazing. It's that if I wasn't aware that so many people fail at this, like if I'd read this first or by itself and hadn't read anything like it before, I'd be like, eh. But because I've seen so many other people do it badly, then I'm like giving it so many points because like apparently that's not something I can expect. I guess I feel much more positively towards The Child Thief, but there's a bit of that. I think that like I've seen so many terrible Peter Pan retellings that when it's getting it right, I'm already just like so relieved and excited to be like with a book that's not messing up, or that like seems to, at least, even if it's maybe not quite the interpretation that I have of Peter Pan, that it seems to be engaging with Peter Pan, the story, not just like, oh, I can't even tell you how frustrated I am with most Peter Pan retellings. But like, I think it's so lazy and reductive and unoriginal to be like, what if Peter Pan's the villain? Because like, again, in the original Peter Pan, he's not the villain. Like, he's not a good guy. He's not the hero of the story. And so it's actually a lot more complex in the original Peter Pan. So to say, oh, I'm gonna do this twist where I make him the villain, you're like, you haven't like added layers, you've taken away layers by doing that. And so I loved that in The Child Thief, that the Peter Pan character, we didn't, I mean, when I saw, Hot Topic Peter Pan was basically what this book was, I was like, oh God, this is going to be just, we made him a villain, how original. And the fact that that's not what this book did, it took that theme of Peter is neither good nor bad and really like expanded it even more, and added more layers to the idea that like you can't pin him down as like a hero or a villain. He is both.
Yeah.
So I was like, yes, 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 yes.
Yeah, I felt that too, and I mean, I guess that could come down to writing style, because I don't, maybe that didn't work for you, Evie. I personally felt very conflicted about Peter, just the way that that Brom gave you the backstory and showed, he made Peter a somewhat sympathetic character with what he went through as a small child. And at the same time, man, I just got so mad at him
Which is like
sometimes.
Nick's experience too, and he's like swept up with Peter, but also realizes that he can't trust Peter.
Hmm.
And like, oh, so like, or we can talk spoilers, right?
Oh yeah, can we talk spoilers?
Just
Yeah.
go for it. I don't care.
So like, I thought like one of the like the perfect scene to be like, yes, he gets it. Like it being Peter Pan was the scene where Nick has gotten Peter Pan to like swear that he's going to help him, and then it comes down to it, and he's like, "But I was crossing my fingers, so it
Yes.
doesn't count." And he's like, "Are you serious right now? Are you actually serious right now?" And he's like, "Yep." You're like, "Yeah, because that's what Peter Pan would do. It's child's logic all of the time."
That's the scene
So.
that I think of, that I was just thinking about. Yeah, where I'm like, I just want to punch you right now. Even after Brom, and it's amazing. It was kind of a cool. I admired Brom for doing that, because he spent so much work as an author building Peter up to be a sympathetic character, and to just tear him down in 2 seconds with "I had my fingers crossed." I thought that was actually pretty bold, honestly.
And even then, like later, so like, it kind of gets under his skin when Nick's like, how many boys have died for this? And Peter is kind of like, oh man, like, I guess, yeah, that's not great. And then he gets swept up in it right away again and is like, nope, it's all worth it for the lady. Yep, we're doing this. And so like the lady is like obviously not a motivation that Peter has in the original. And I'm, like he's expanded and done a whole lot more with this story. But it's that core of like getting, like if I imagine J.M. Barrie's Peter Pan transported into a world where like Avalon and Faye are, I'm like, I think how he would behave, how he would react to this. So that's why it feels like, like we've talked a lot about recently, like here, there, everywhere about adaptations and about interpretations and about like an adaptation doesn't need to be to the letter of what something is, but it's the spirit of what something is. And so like a retelling of Peter Pan, it doesn't have to be the events of Peter Pan. You have can run in all different directions with it, but like the spirit of like the characters and what J.M. Barrie was getting at, I think is alive in this.
I feel that too. I completely agree. And I keep, something I thought about a lot. Are you a Stephen King fan at all, Leanne?
I haven't. I mean, he's written like 100 books, and I think I've read like 7. So I like Stephen King, but
So
I haven't
I've
read that
only
much.
read like 7, probably,
Okay.
or 8, maybe a couple more. I don't know. But when I read this book last year or listened to this book last year, one of my first thoughts was I feel like Stephen King fans might enjoy this book because of especially the urban fantasy parts. I feel like something about the way he portrayed Nick and the young characters, it reminds me of the young, gritty characters, coming of age stories that Stephen King does so well. And I don't think either of you read Fairy Tale, which came out this year and was a
I
little
have
bit.
it, but I haven't read it.
Uh, I think a lot of I won't give away spoilers, but I'll just say I think a lot of people were a bit disappointed with that book being a portal fantasy and the portal fantasy elements specifically, and what you were saying about adaptations, it was very much an homage to the fairy tale. And so you see so many nods and winks that are over the top, straightforward on the nose in the portal fantasy part of that book. And it's not very horror like. And I kind of feel like people who maybe thought that book didn't work so well might actually enjoy this one because it takes a lot of the similar elements. It's a portal fantasy. We're dealing with kind of a fairy tale-esque world with the Arthurian legend tied in. We have those young, gritty characters that King writes so well, although the one he does in Fairy Tale is quite wholesome. And I just feel like he makes it work. He makes it blend together better than Stephen King was able to do in Fairy Tale. And that's just a personal opinion. Uh, but yeah, I don't know. For me, it worked, and I think it was really how he made it come together, especially at the end. And I think the author's note also can add some appreciation for some people too, maybe. But understand, Evie. I understand if you didn't like it. You could share more about that.
So, I mean, again, I understand what he was doing. Um, the thing that I liked the best about it was Peter Pan himself. It's the character. If he had framed it a little bit differently, but I don't know how else he could have done it without, like, he couldn't have framed it any other way to get to the intent that he was trying to do. But I also didn't like. I feel like I just wanted a different framing somehow. I just didn't like. I liked the focus on Peter Pan. So when we didn't have that focus on Peter Pan, it lost it for me. And
So I was about to praise it for that kind of.
different
Well, 'cause I
readers.
was gonna say that I feel like a lot of books, the bad ones, will just be like, it's Peter Pan, get it? And like that's the only thing they're doing with it. And everything else about it kind of like isn't thought out, isn't fleshed out, there's nothing to it. It's just like Peter's the villain, get it? I did a thing. And like they haven't thought about Captain Hook, they haven't thought about Wendy, they haven't thought about anything else about the world, about any of it. And it'll be like this cardboard cutout, complete nonsense. And so here, like, while Peter is extremely central, and I think is well done, I think there is a lot of care and attention paid to like the origin. Again, like the origin of the pirates is often also handled so shallowly, where it's like, what if Hook is the hero and Peter's the villain? So like here again, it wasn't that simple. I mean, like the pirates, like, yeah, from the way Peter tells it, at first they are just kind of off screen and this villainous force that you don't really know that much about, and you do actually learn more. You peel back the onion and learn about how they came to be there, and that it's not because like I think Nick makes the suggestion, it's like, well, why don't we just help them leave, like then everyone would be happy. And they're like, no, maybe once upon a time we could have done that, but now they're all monstrous and we can't do that anymore. And then you see them and you see Captain Hook, and well, I don't think he's not called Captain Hook, I think he's just the captain, but the captain. And and like you again, it's messy. It's not like he's the hero, and it's not like, oh, he's the villain. This is a messy situation that even like what the lady has done to people and the way she like has people in her thrall, she's not just like, it's not a twist where like she's the evil one all along. She's just Faye, and like that's just kind of like, people come into like her gravity, and it just kind of is what it is, and it puts people in kind of untenable situations. And I just like how he constantly was like doing that, where none of the characters were good or bad. And every time you thought you had it pegged because the character would tell you, oh, those are the bad guys, then you would see them and you would understand where they came from. And you'd be like, okay, but they aren't though. And then the way that like we resolve the situation and the confrontation of like the people who've been trapped from a different time seeing the modern day, that can also be so corny and so like Disney Channel original movie, you know, like the idea of like pirates from the bygone era in the city being like, what's a taxi, what's a skyscraper, and even that was handled, I think, with the right amount of like horror that it would be for those people encountering this world and not knowing anything and knowing that everyone they knew is dead and there is nowhere for them to return to. Like it was handled, like there was jokes, obviously, like culture clash, because that is funny, it just would be, but it wasn't just played for laughs. It wasn't just like this like cammy, you know, slapstick kind of like nonsense. It was handled with weight.
Yeah, who was it? He's not called the priest. The Puritan character.
The pastor character, yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So I vividly remember when they get back to New York and the Puritan character, I'm gonna just keep calling him Puritan character. He realizes that, you know, he's in a modern era and that he sees a church. It's like, oh, at least the church is still there. And, you know, there you go.
Right.
That guy.
Yes.
The Reverend, there you go.
Reverend,
I'm like,
yes.
priest, Reverend, religious figure, whatever.
And the art is, I think, would you agree the art is really good? Even?
Yes, it's amazing.
Yeah. Okay. Like I can't draw a straight line with a ruler, so you know.
Hey, just because someone has talent doesn't mean I like their style. So like,
touche.
If there was at least one thing you could enjoy about the book, you know, then the art.
So again, the more that I'm thinking about it, I think the reason why, like, the crux of my, I don't even want to call it hate anymore, just my displeasure at this reading experience and this story is the urban fantasy part. I realized reading this book that I don't like urban fantasy.
You know what? I usually hate urban fantasy.
I was gonna say I also usually hate urban fantasy.
So yeah. Good company.
And if there was like when at the very, it's not like I loved it from page one. When I realized on page one that we were in a very modern setting, I was like, we have Hot Topic Peter Pan in a modern setting. I don't know if I'm gonna like this. And then it won me over because as soon as we were kind of in the portal part of the fantasy, it was not really relevant that it was the modern day.
Yeah, I agree with Matt that again, a good portion, because that's part of the urban part of the story of the fantasy is like how the kids were written. And like, yes, I know that kids curse and do dumb stuff all the time, but I'm like, I mean, not to say that I'm a paragon of virtue or anything like that, but I don't want to see an F word every other word. Like,
okay, so it also, I was reading this at the same time that I was reading Empire of the Vampire, and it was benefiting greatly from that juxtaposition where I was like, there's a book with a bunch of F-bombs and art that's garbage, and here's a book with a bunch of F-bombs and art that is quite good.
Yeah, I you know, I do not usually like urban fantasy, Evie. There's some minor exceptions here and there. For me, I think it's kind of like what Leanne said though, because I'm thinking of I don't know. I feel bad saying this because I actually liked the book and it is kind of urban fantasy, but I was just it's been too many years. I don't want to mention it. But there's I've seen it
no,
before.
you have to say because I'm so
fine.
curious.
Ninth House by Lee Bardugo. I actually liked Ninth House. I read it a few years ago, but the one thing I didn't like about Ninth House was I felt like the douchey teenage, or not teenage, but college frat boys, that the way she wrote the dialogue for them and the way she wrote those characters felt so generic and cookie cutter, and how an adult fantasy writer would write characters like that instead of a realistic portrayal of those type of characters. And even though these characters were obnoxious, for me, for some reason, there was something about them that, for me, I don't know. And here I am, I'm not that type of person. So what do I know? But for me, it felt like it was stepping into reality somehow. So for
Well,
me,
to
it
me,
was,
it also like worked because like I feel like again the original Peter Pan, Peter is not the hero, and also the Lost Boys, like this is a paradise of pure hedonism, and like the Lost Boys are going around and thinks it's fun. They think it's fun to have war games, and like this isn't like a nice little place for children to be children, which is how a lot of people like who haven't actually read Peter Pan, that's how you know. Like, tell me you haven't read Peter Pan without telling me you haven't read Peter Pan. If you think
yeah,
it's like, oh, it's about kids being forever young and isn't that sweet? Like, it's really not. They're monsters, and so like even J.M. Barrie's version, like it's it was a play and it's kind of glossed over and it's like, oh, they're doing war games, but it's we don't really go into it, which is again kind of Brom's project with this is like, okay, but what if we like did go there though? Like what does that actually look like? If you're telling me there's an island of kids playing war games, like it's like it's kind of dark in J.M. Barrie's, but like what would that really look like? And so here, because it was really savage and like violent and
I mean,
the kind of
they're literally counting like how many pirates did you get, or whatever. So like I'm like, Jesus Christ.
And that guy whose name escapes me because it's been a few weeks since I read this, who's like hasn't like leveled up and is like bitter and picking fights with everybody all the time and has this weird chip on his shoulder, and the way that he's like a character out of a Hobb book where I was like, I hate him so much, and
yeah,
like that's how like Kyle Haven would behave if he was in like Neverland.
Yeah. Oh, freaking
I can't remember that character's name. I cannot, if anybody remembers, but
God.
it was obnoxious.
Who was it?
But again, he was written so well because like you've
Yeah.
seen like kids that like that's what bullies are like, and that's usually why they're bullying.
Oh,
So
100%.
yeah.
Yeah. No, I actually really didn't have a problem with how the kids were written in this story. I can understand if you don't like kids like that and you're not enjoying the
I can
story.
understand like not having a good time reading about them being awful.
Yeah, yeah.
But
I can understand that too. Yeah, the original, I haven't read the original, but we're in an ancient land of magic, fairies, and adventure. But we spend so much time with kids rolling eyes and bullies cussing out over and over.
well, in this were for me, like I think he's playing a lot in this book with juxtaposition and the way that we have like these clashes all the time, and the way that just Peter is himself of another time and is himself half fae, and the way that he has gathered these boys to him, these boys from the modern day who do not have those sensibilities or that history or that thinking. So like they're like not even on the same page with like what's going on here when Peter's like what he thinks he's doing and how he's gathering kids to him, and they kind of like heroicize him and revere him and follow him, but they're modern and that is not where they come from. That
I
is not how they approach this.
Oh,
So I love that.
I love that too because you see the evolution of time and how that's affecting the way the kids are, how he's able to manipulate the kids. And it seems like the kids who came from earlier time eras were more easily swept in under his spell than the ones of this modern age. I thought that was, and it's sort of like, I
We're
think
too
that,
cynical now.
yeah, yeah, we're too cynical now. And it sort of mirrors the whole magic leaving the world, which I think is brought up in, fairy tale, obviously, in the story.
Well, something that I recognized early on, not to say that I was like, oh, I recognized it early. I didn't need, clues or whatever, is Nick's hesitancy or just total distrust of Peter. The whole reason he goes to Neverland is because he's like, okay, I'm just gonna go along with this guy. Oh yeah, sure, yeah, I believe. Okay, I really believe. When Peter's like, oh, you have to actually believe, and but he doesn't. So like, I don't know. Like the more modern the kids are, the more, I don't want to say the less innocent they are, but the more, not, I don't even say want to say jaded, but like the less childlike they are. That's the only way I can describe it.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But I mean, even as I say that, like who was it Redbone? Who was he used to be a slave. Was that Redbone or was that a different character?
I think that sounds right. Yeah. I know
Like,
what you're talking about.
yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, like all of the characters have like trauma that have
Mhm.
happened to them, and that's their common bond of sorts. But the more modern kids are less apt to kind of just believe whatever Peter wants them to believe, like you guys said. Um,
And they don't have parental figures as much.
yeah.
So, for example, Nick's character, his mom's totally checked out. Obviously, he's
Although
having to grow up
that's
really
what he
fast.
that's what he believes, which I did like how that kind of there was that shift of perception that he realized, like, actually, his mom is worried about him, is trying to, the reason that she doesn't say anything about Marco, or is it Marco? Marcus?
That
Marco?
sounds right. I think that's what he said.
Um, and the people that are living with her is because she is scared and she wants to protect him.
Well, she, like a lot of the people in the Neverland, you hear that they're villainous, just like
Yeah.
the pirates. And then you actually realize what their situation is and how it was an impossible situation. And they are making the best of it and doing the best they can. So, like,
Mhm.
I feel like, again, almost every character gets that in the story. Whatever you think you know about them, you're going to find out at the very least it's not that simple.
Right.
Yeah. So,
Except for the
yeah,
Reverend.
there's so.
The Reverend was definitely villainous.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah.
But I also again with the like juxtaposition and having like I don't know paralleling of things like the way that Peter and his long standing beef with like what's his name who's like the nephew of the lady or whatever that like this is this long standing he's kind of the bully that Peter's had to contend with all this time, and then among the Lost Boys we have that bully who like is treating the kids this way, but it's a much more modern version of that. And so seeing this like old-timey Shakespearean speaking like you peasant, like you have no right, you don't have the blood, like I am blah 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 blah, and then you have the modern version of that where he's like, you kids, you pick that up, you clean that up, I'm gonna fight you. And it's like they're both the same character and they're both like using their position and they both have like not fragile masculinity, but like it's because they feel insecure that they act out this way. And it's this like whether it's Avalon or New York City, like they're gonna act like this the same.
I never made that connection before. That's such a good point. Yeah. That's cool.
Just brings to
Also,
mind.
every time someone hurt one of the pixies, I like it was always described in a way where I was like, "Oh my god,
Yeah.
hurt them." Like when he actually killed it in front of them, I was like, I gasped. I was like, "This is so horrifying."
Yeah.
Ugh,
That pixie stuff. Oh my goodness.
So I don't.
Pretty
This is
gross
like
at one point.
my mom wouldn't let me watch the Roger Rabbit movie when I was a kid because I would get the wrong idea if I saw Jessica Rabbit. So I wasn't allowed to watch that as a kid. But like now that I've seen it, like it's not. I mean, it is kind of weird for a kids movie. Like it has a lot of adult stuff in it. But the thing that I feel like would have traumatized me as a kid, because it traumatizes me as an adult, so I'm glad I probably never saw it as a kid, is when he's I don't know if you guys have seen Who Framed Roger Rabbit.
Long time
When
ago. Don't really remember it though.
Well, when the villain is demonstrating how dip works, it's that like toxic substance that he's invented that kills tunes. So then he has the vat of dip and he takes this little cartoon shoe and he like holds it over the dip and he slowly drops the shoe into this like dip liquid and the shoe is like and like doesn't want and then it gets dipped, it gets killed like to demonstrate what this does. And this is such a horrifying scene, and that's like the pixies reminded me of. I was like, this is the shoe getting dipped.
Oh
This
my
is so
goodness.
sad.
I don't remember that, so
Me neither. I need to see that movie again.
I guess
It's traumatizing.
either I don't remember it at all, or it was so traumatizing that I blocked it out of my memory. I just remember, what is it, Bob something. The guy, the flesh and blood actor.
Oh yeah, I don't remember his name.
But yeah, what was I gonna say? Oh god, I just had a thought and it left me. Never mind. Oh yes, so the one thing that I well, one of the things, I was the like the bull type character. I tried to I was really struggling with like the lady and like her group of people, like how they were all connected, because it all seemed those scenes with specifically the lady, and her like group of cohorts and stuff like that. It seemed I don't know, I just couldn't keep track of everybody. So my question is how was the Taurus bull character? Like what was he, who was he to everybody else? I don't remember. Do you guys remember?
Are you talking about Ulfgar, that
Maybe?
character, and his father?
Maybe. Hold on, let me see if I can find the picture.
Oh, no, no, no. You're talking about, okay, yeah. You're talking about that. I know who you're talking about. I just can't think of his name.
Yeah.
You're talking about the one who was sort of
Oh,
helping.
I guess it's technically the troll, but he was like,
Yes, the troll.
yeah. But
Yeah.
yeah, the goat guy. There you go. I don't know why I said bull, but yeah, goat guy. Like I don't know. Some of this stuff, it was hard for my brain to like connect everything. It just my
I
brain.
found that a little bit tricky too, honestly. I found some of the Lady of the Lake and those characters a little bit tricky to get my head around. I think that those are actually, I think he did draw though a lot of those from Arthurian lore, from what I understand. But I'm
Well,
not
I
as
mean,
familiar with those parts.
early on we get, this inkling that the lady is not great when young Peter is confronted by the witch character with the daughters, and she's like, I just want your eyes, she wants your soul. That like you're like,
I think
ruh-roh.
I think isn't that character based on Morgan Le Fay? I think that one, I want to say the Green
Possibly.
Witch is based on Morgan Le Fay, and then the Lady of the Lake, um, that's like its own Arthurian mythical character. As for yeah, so I think a lot of these characters are based on.
It probably should have occurred to me that she's meant to be Morgan Le Fay, but to me she just like reminded me of like Eastern European witches,
Yeah,
or like, on their chicken leg huts and want something from you.
yeah. Well, I wonder if a lot of them are kind of descended from that too, from that legend. Because
Well,
Morgan Le
Or
Fay,
just there's a lot of like mishmash and like trading of legends across all of Europe.
well,
So
like
there probably is, yeah.
also like the fates and stuff like that, like with their shared eye, and that's what I thought of when they were describing that witch character, because she only has one eye. It's like, oh, it's like the fates or whatever.
it
But
reminded me of the witches from the Chronicles of Prydain by Lloyd Alexander.
I thought you were gonna say the Hercules movie, but I'm like, yeah, that's what I thought of. But so the only thing that I probably the reason that I couldn't like get over this and find a connection or like understand the connection is I was looking through the pictures before, like as I was reading, which is probably a bad idea on my part, but I saw this picture and I knew that Brom worked on World of Warcraft, and it just made me think of the Tauren. So I'm like, what are these like Tauren creatures? Anyway, sorry, that's an aside. But yeah. That is totally an aside. Yeah, long story short, I didn't like this book, but I might reread it. I don't know. Joanna, have you read anything else by Brom? I can't remember if you
I
said.
haven't. This is the only Brom book I've read. And last year, after listening to the audiobook, and I had just connected with Bookish Drummer, who I knew was a huge Stephen King fan. I said, hey, I just have a feeling if you're a Stephen King fan, you might enjoy this because of the horror fantasy, urban fantasy, young protagonist in a, sort of thing. And he ended up really enjoying it. He did really enjoy it and actually agreed with that. And he went on to read Krampus, which is that Christmas like one. If you've all seen the cover looks awesome to that. And I've heard from him and from others who've read that particular book that one's even better, that one's a lot better. So
Yeah, I feel like Krampus is more popular, and Child Thief was just the one that, I mean, I would have bought it if I hadn't so many people buying it for me, because like I'm like, okay, I know that Krampus is over here, but this one's Peter Pan, so like
Yeah.
going for that one.
I am intrigued by Slewfoot, which is like a witch Salem
Yeah. I
thing.
know, I know Brittany from Books with Brittany said she didn't care for that one as much. She was the one who actually got me interested in Brom, but I've also heard other people, I think Nick, said that he really loves that. So, yeah, I've heard just varying opinions on Brom's but it seems like the most popular one is the Krampus one. So it's a good
I mean,
Christmas time choice, I guess.
to be honest, despite his popularity, part of me was like, an artist deciding to write a book too to go with his pictures is like, how good is this? It's just gonna feel like I needed some words to go with my art, but art is the thing I'm really interested in doing here. Which, like, fair enough, like you're an artist, so that is like your first love. But I was also then I was like, Peter Pan gets messed up so often, and then I was kind of like, an artist writing a story around their art, like, okay, so like I just went in being very skeptical, and then was at every turn impressed, pleasantly surprised, and like it like overshot the mark that I had set for it.
Yay, I'm so glad. Yeah, I mean, I know that you were saying the writing didn't work for you, Evie. Was there anything in particular? It was just the characters, or because I know for me, I think one thing that I personally found impressive was how he was able to write these characters from very different settings and different timelines. And for me, they all felt very distinct and realistic to their timeline. And that's something I always appreciate in an author if they're
Yeah, like
able.
you wouldn't need to be told which character is from a different time period, just
Yeah.
from their like manner and speech, you would
Mhm.
know.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think again with the way that he structured it, like starting off with Nick's perspective, like, and then switching to Peter, I think he just kind of it set off on the wrong foot for me, and I never was able to kind of get over that initial like how it started. Um,
Ah, yeah, that makes sense.
so
I mean,
I mean,
Peter Pan was arguably one of the original urban fantasies because for its time, those kids are living in the modern day. It's just historical for us now. So it
Yeah.
was an urban fantasy for its time.
Yeah, and a portal fantasy too, so that makes
touche,
sense.
touche, but yeah. So
Yeah. No, that makes perfect sense though, Evie, because I mean it is.
So Evie would have been in the theater in J.M. Barrie's day and been like, "Nope, I don't like
yeah.
this. It's
Could have
too
been.
modern."
Could have been.
Yeah, no, it just again, it's not that I'm a prude or goody two shoes or anything like that. I curse like a sailor myself, but it just felt a little bit. Just everything was a combination of the wrong things for me, of little bits of wrong things that built up into just massive frustrations for me with the book. Um, a
I feel
lot of
like that
it,
sentence was me up until you said frustration. You're like, all these little things that built up, and I was like, yes, all these little things that built up, and you were like, frustrations, and I was like, brilliance.
Yeah, I mean, I can't see both. I can see your side of things though too, Evie, because I do think he starts off and it's kind of jarring. It's like there's this and there's this and it's clash. There's dissonance there with these kind of it's
and,
like a tonal clash. It's a tonal clash in a
yeah,
way.
and it honestly, like, looking back on it, hindsight, it's 2020, it makes sense for the story, the way that it's, those kind of, or not disconnects, but, like, the kind of juxtaposition of the 2 things, and, I you could even argue that the seemingly gratuitous or debatable gratuitous of like the young kids or whatever is the point, like that it was intentional gratuity going on. um but again, I think it was the wrong book at the wrong time for me.
Yeah.
And because it's
No.
just this book that's been the wrong book the wrong time. So if I reread it on my own terms, I
Uh,
probably hopefully would be able to appreciate it better.
yeah. Yeah, for me, like I said, I can see what you're saying totally, and that's totally valid. I yeah, the beginning was the roughest part. I liked how he got where he got though with it. I think I don't know. It's almost like starting off with a problem and then eventually resolving it. For me, I feel like he was able to get all these parts that seemed incohesive and then merge them and show them connecting. I don't know. For me, it worked, but I can totally understand why this wouldn't work for some people. I could
Yeah, I
totally.
feel like for everyone saying the beginning is the roughest part, like, I mean, I agree. Like I said, when I started, I was like, this is modern day, and what I was like, what does this have to do with Peter Pan at all? Like, what are we doing? And this is kind of mean and gross, and I don't know about this. And it wasn't that it was badly written, because like for the scenes he's writing for the beginning of the book, like I did feel quite immediately invested in the situation this character is in, and because I was at the same time reading Empire of the Vampire, I was there was like so many times in Empire of the Vampire where it's like he's overwriting every scene, and it's like this supposed to be this like epic, dark, gritty moment, and I'm just like, versus the Child Thief, pretty immediately I was like, oh, that's so alarming and so dark, and I'm so like upset to read this, as opposed to Empire of the Vampire. I was like, you want me to be upset about this, but I'm intensely bored. So
Your
it was
live
just like,
show, by
oh,
the
like
way, I did watch some of your live show for that. I was laughing so I haven't read Empire of the Vampire, but I just find it I don't mean to go off on a tangent here, but I just find it funny because some people I hear different things about that book. It's like people are either it's campy, I like it, I'm owning it. I know it's cringy hot topic, but it works for me. And then some people who are like, it's so deep, or just I don't know. I never get the impression they're like buying into I don't know. It's like a different story to so many different people. But then the way you all described it, I'm like, oh yeah, I can't read this book. There's no
it was
way.
like I didn't plan to read these side by side, but it was kind of crazy to do that, just because like there is so much to compare. Again, they both have art, they both have this like, edgy hot topic, like we're doing the dark version of something. They're both quite long, they're both quite like, I don't know, I think Evie would say this one is bloated. I would certainly say the other one is. And again, it was just like there's so many times when like I'm reading a lot of bad books, and I'm like, do I just not like reading? Do I just not feel things for fictional people? Is that just who I am? And then I'll pick up a book and I'm like, I feel so many things. Oh, okay, it wasn't me. Those were
Oh,
bad books. So like reading Empire of the Vampire, I was like, am I just so desensitized to violence that I just don't care about all of this blood on every page? And then I read Child Thief, and within a page, I was like, oh, like no, like I am not desensitized. This is
something
upsetting to
happens to
read.
a pixie, and you're like, ah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Even just the altercation that like Nick is in when he's being threatened by Mark person. Anyway, like it felt like the danger of that situation and Peter getting him out of it. Like I felt the tension and stakes of that. So I thought it was, to begin with, I was like, I don't know about what you're doing with this. Like, well, we'll see how you handle Peter Pan. But so far, like I think you're a good writer. So we'll see how this goes. And then like, yeah, it adds in more and more things. And I feel like at first I might have had the inclination to kind of like not give over to it and be like, what are you doing? Is this Peter Pan? Are you messing this up? What's this over here? What are you doing with this? But like instead I kind of was like, well, I think you're a good writer. Okay, you know what? I'm just gonna like, you take the wheel. You want to bring these things into it. Okay. All right, we'll see what you do with it. And I felt like I was rewarded for like letting him like take me on this journey.
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah.
I can actually agree with you there. Even well, I don't know. I feel like every single like this happened with The Memory Called
The
Empire.
best 2-star book you've ever read.
So this is what happened with The Memory Called Empire too. I gave it a bad rating, 2 stars. And then I talked about it and I'm like, God damn it. Like, am I gonna be convinced to like this book? Like, or at least bump up the rating? Like,
It's usually my mission to get people to lower their ratings.
all right, well, I mean, it's way past my bedtime. So any final thoughts on Brom and or the Child Thief?
I would just encourage people to read Brahms' author note when you finish because it's really, I think it's great. And he also explains how he was inspired by the original J.M. Barrie Peter Pan. And I agree with what you two were sharing. I think that It's so worthwhile to read the original Jamberry
I
Peter
was gonna
Pan.
say, like, in addition to the author's note, people should read Peter
Yes.
Pan.
Yeah.
They're gonna read this.
'Cause it is dark. It definitely has darker tones and has some problematic content too. You have to keep in mind when it was written, but
For a
um,
classic, it's probably on the less problematic side. There's
probably.
a lot of problematic content
Yeah.
in classics.
Yeah. Yeah. But that's all I would say is just to keep in mind that he's doing a lot of things at once. And I think just there's going to be a spectrum of people, whether that works for them or it doesn't work for them. And I think it's totally fine. Evie, if you didn't like it, I just appreciate that you took the time to read it and that, we're willing to talk about it.
You got to look at pretty pictures.
Yeah, you got to see pretty pictures there too.
I mean, I could just take your congratulations and be like, yeah, I did read it. I was obligated to read it, so there's really no congratulations of like, oh, thank you for reading it. And I kind of had to. But no. I mean, I am interested in trying, like, it could have just been the wrong book at the wrong time for me. Maybe Slewfoot or Krampus would work better for me. So
Yeah, it could
Yeah,
be.
read it
I
smarter.
haven't tried any of his other books yet. And somebody was saying that the audio, Urza was saying the audio. My audio did. I use Scribd. I used Scribd both times, and it did
Yeah,
have the author's note.
it's at the end of the book. It's not like
Mhm.
throughout. I don't know if
Yeah, it's at the
you had
very
that
end.
confusion. Yeah, it's like at the end of the book. There's like a note from the author.
yeah.
So
Yeah.
if you just like were like I'm done, and then you would have missed the author's note.
Which I appreciate the author's note at the end. That would have driven me crazy if there were like footnotes throughout. I guess I'm just not a footnotes person, I've learned. So yeah.
Yeah, footnotes can be done well, but I feel like most authors, it's like a Peter Pan retelling. Most authors mess it up, but it can be done and it can be
I
done
believe
well. It's
you.
just the exception.
I believe you. Yeah. I
Jonathan
haven't read
Strange
Jonathan. Is Jonathan Strange
Jonathan
and
Strange and Mr.
Nora?
Norrell is what
Yeah.
I'm thinking of.
I haven't read that yet, but I will someday because I loved Peter Nazy by that author. So
Although it is very different. Like I
that's
feel
what I
like her
hear.
authorial voices, it's like, oh, this is Susanna Clark writing this, but otherwise they're very, very different.
Yeah. Cool.
All right. So you got any final thoughts, Lena?
I mean, read Peter Pan, probably before reading this, if you're gonna read this. Peter Pan is very short. It is a teeny tiny fraction of the length of this.
It's true.
And I also feel like if you don't like the original Peter Pan, like if you pick up Jan Barry's Peter Pan and you don't like it, it's not impossible that you would like this, but I feel like there's a much lower likelihood of you liking this because I do feel like he is so much inspired by and in conversation with the original and is taking the ideas of the original and running with them to like their natural conclusion if you take this as far as it will go. And if you already don't like the original ideas, like seeing them pushed even further in the directions Jan Barry was like kind of like flirting with, then yeah, I feel like Peter Pan the original is the litmus test for whether or not you're gonna like this.
Yes. Which I realized after I finished the book that there were other parts of Peter Pan, like the Peter and Wendy, that I realized was not in the edition of Peter Pan that I had read. So I feel like if I had the full context, I would have been able to appreciate what Brom was doing even more. But yeah. But I'm going to end this stream on this very kind
This
note.
that's terrible advice.
Yeah.
That's cruel.
So, well, there you go. Thank you everyone for joining. Thank you, Joanna and Lena, for joining me and talking me off of a cliff and keeping this for, honestly, I was like, how am I going to talk for like more than 10 minutes about this book? So thank you for praising this book where it needed. And thank you everyone in chat for joining. Yeah, so I guess that's it. I don't know how to do outros. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.